Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here back after my own 2-week break from holiday to break down UFC Vegas 109. And I've come back to, let's just say, a very interesting card. From a betting perspective, it's super difficult. Pretty much every favourite is massively chalked, apart from maybe one or two. So yeah, from a betting perspective, it's a very, very difficult card unless you are somebody that loves to parlay 2, 3, 4 fights. But yeah, it's a difficult one. So we'll get into it. We'll break it down. We'll see if there is any value on the underdogs. I actually only think there's 1 or 2 underdogs on the entire card as well that are even, you know, any sort of remotely interesting. Yeah, like I say, it's a difficult one. Everybody that you know follows me knows that I love to go underdog hunting and find really good dogs. I do it week in, week out. But yeah, this card's a stretch from a betting perspective. It really is. So again, you know, it's an interesting card. Interesting from a betting perspective, and we'll get into it shortly. But just before we do, as always, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. And let's be honest, like with what I've just said, with how difficult the card is, the event is from a betting perspective, you might need to do so this week because it is very tough. But we've got something for every type of gambler. If you're a long-term gambler that likes full written breakdowns for us to explain why we're recommending a certain bet and a certain play, then we've got that section for you. If you're a fun gambler that likes long shot parlays, whether you want pre-built parlays so you don't have to do any thinking, or whether you want options to help you build your own parlays, then that section is for you as well. And then of course we've got our official bet section where any official bets from the professional handicapper, which is myself, will be detailed in there as well. So again, if all you want to do is tail a professional handicapper and put zero thought into absolutely anything, then that section is perfect for you. And with all our betting subscription packages comes Base AI, which is our UFC prediction software. It gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC fight, of every UFC event. And I'm personally really interested in this week as well, because like I say, we've got a card of massively chalked favourites, and I know Base AI loves to produce a load of underdogs as well. So I'm very interested to see A, how many underdogs are on the card from Base AI's perspective that it's favouring, and B, which ones, because like I say, there's a load of like minus 400, 500, 600 favourites on the card. So yeah, everything comes with Base AI. We don't separate the two processes of the professional handicapper and the AI prediction software. Everything is included. All you need to do is decide how long you want the subscription for. We do a next event subscription, we do a monthly subscription, and we also do an annual subscription as well. Everything's super affordable, as our ethos is we want you to make your money back as quickly as you possibly can from what you've spent with us, so you can start profiting on top of your bets. And that's exactly how we achieve that with the pricing structure that we set. So again, if you want to jump into the action, make sure you go to MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get down to breaking some fights down. And of course, as always, we start with that main event. We've got 5 rounds between Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. And again, like, you know, I love Roman Dolidze. He's a fighter that I've cashed on multiple times as an underdog. He's very much overlooked in a lot of his fights from the betting market perspective, and like I say, he does end up in a lot of spots where he is an underdog, and we've taken numerous of those in his UFC career so far. You know, we've not cashed on him every time, but we've cashed some good plus money bets on Roman Dolidze. So he's a fighter that I definitely like, that does usually perform in the status of an underdog as well. But I think this fight's really difficult because Anthony Hernandez is just a nightmare fighter right now for opponents to deal with. And, you know, you wouldn't have said this 4 or 5 years ago. Anthony Hernandez was a very beatable fighter, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. But he's turned his style into this, like, relentless wrestling style where, you know, he doesn't hit every takedown, and he doesn't hit the takedown on every first attempt either. He chain wrestles really well. It's an ability that I think he's found over the last few years. But also what's more important is he's got that 5-round cardio to be doing this consistently throughout 5 rounds. takedowns. And another fighter that's exactly the same as this is a Merab Dvalishvili, and I kind of think that Anthony Hernandez isn't a million miles away from a Merab Dvalishvili. Like, the striking isn't like super sharp, you know, the wrestling's decent, the grappling is good as well. I actually think from a grappling perspective, pound for pound, Hernandez's grappling is better than Merab's as well. So, you know, when you're making those comparisons to Merab and Anthony Hernandez, I genuinely think Hernandez has got every chance of, you know, pushing himself towards a title shot. And this might be that one step that gets him real close. You know, it might be a number one contenders fight after this. I genuinely think that Anthony Hernandez isn't really getting the respect that he definitely deserves with his performances and the style of fighter that he actually is. Like I say, he's a nightmare. He's a problem for everybody that deals with him, because you know that the wrestling's come in. You know that even if you defend the first 1, 2, 3, 4, then takedown attempt number 5, 6, and 7 is on its way. And he's got the cardio to do it for 5 rounds as well. So it's not as if you're thinking, well, he's a 3-round fighter, and if you can defend those takedowns for 3 rounds, then, you know, hopefully it gets into the so-called championship rounds 4 and 5, and that's where you can get it in. Because no, he's still going to be going in rounds 4 and 5 as well. So yeah, he's just a difficult fighter, and I actually like the fight in general. And the fact that Hernandez is only like a minus 300 favourite, and I say only because I genuinely think that Dolidze, the fact that he is a stoic fighter and a fighter that generally performs well as an underdog and has caused massive upsets in the past, is the reason why Hernandez isn't a minus 500, minus 600 favourite here. And, you know, Dolidze does have power and he's got a good grappling game as well, but I just think Dolidze is going to get smothered here. And also, I don't think that Dolidze is going to have that same level of gas tank as Anthony Hernandez as well. Like, when Hernandez is pushing this pace, if it is to get into the later rounds, you know, late round 3, 4, and 5, then I think that Hernandez's gas tank and cardio, especially with the way that the fight's going to play out, because, you know, it is going to be Hernandez shooting in takedown after takedown after takedown. Dolidze is going to defend a few. He's going to get taken down a few times. He's going to get up a few times. You know, I think Hernandez will have some good top control time as well the longer the fight goes on. And I just think that Dolidze will be able to deal with that pressure and the pace, especially from a gas tank perspective, but only for a certain amount of time. I think the longer the fight goes on, the more this game plan and the style of Hernandez starts playing out or continues to play out. I think the more tired Dolidze is going to get. Every takedown from then is going to get a little bit tougher to defend. Every time he is taken down, it's going to be a little bit tougher to stand back up. And I just don't know whether Dolidze is going to be able to cope with that for a full 5 rounds, whereas I'm confident that Hernandez will be able to outwork Dolidze from a stylistic perspective and from a gas tank perspective as well. I think Dolidze's best chance in this fight is to keep distance, to stay on the feet, and to try and land on fluffy as he's coming in. Things up the middle like uppercuts, knees, teep kicks to the body, just anything to try and keep Hernandez away. But I just don't think he's going to present any sort of like attacks up the middle from a defensive perspective that Hernandez hasn't seen before. So I think Hernandez will find a way around it, and it's just a case of, look, if Dolidze does crack Hernandez with something hard, then maybe he can knock him out. But again, this is, we're at the Apex in Vegas. It's the small cage. Again, that favours Hernandez as well. He has to cover less distance to close the distance and get his takedowns. I just think any Roman Dolidze win here is likely going to be a low percentage outcome, whereas what I can see happening is Hernandez just racking up, a shitload of takedowns, and then the longer the fight goes on, getting more and more top control time. And maybe if Dolidze does tire out that badly, maybe Hernandez does get him out of there late. That's a possibility with a submission. Like I say, Dolidze is a very, very good and a high-level grappler for the UFC level anyway. But if he's tired and things have happened throughout the fight and he's just drained and Hernandez is having a load of top control time, then, again, that percentage probability of Hernandez finding a submission does increase. So, yeah, look, maybe Hernandez dominates a 5-round fight here. Maybe he does get Dolidze out of there late, but I'm just seeing a Hernandez win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Anthony Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, this is a makeshift fight. We've got Steve Erceg versus Ode Osbourne. And yeah, look, it's quite surprising how the UFC have come to this, but I kind of don't blame them either because, Steve Erceg was supposed to fight Alex Perez. Perez got injured. Then they booked Steve Erceg against Hyun-Sung Park, but then Hyun-Sung Park was needed once Albazi pulled out last week, so Hyun-Sung Park got put against Tyra, and then that left Steve Erceg with no opponent again. So now they've brought in O'Day Osbourne. You know, there's no way initially the UFC would have booked Steve Erceg against O'Day Osbourne, because from UFC standards it is a bit of a mismatch, or it is very much a mismatch in my opinion. And again, you'll see that on the betting line as well. When it opened yesterday, Erceg opened minus 400, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's not going to last. And then within an hour, it's minus 500. And I just think it's going to climb throughout fight week. Like I say, I feel like there's going to be a lot of parlays on this card. I think everybody's going to be parlaying fighters, just because there is no, or very little, favourite that's, a decent number, and underdogs are a little bit thin as well. So with it being a parlay card, I just think fighters like Steve Erceg are going to end up in everybody's parlay, so it wouldn't surprise me if that line climbed to like minus 600, minus 700. But yeah, it's a tough one for O'Day Osbourne. Like I say, from a striking perspective, I think he's outmatched. From a wrestling perspective, I think he's outmatched. A grappling perspective, I think he's outmatched. And also, even from like an experience perspective, yeah, he's been in the UFC longer, but Steve Erceg has fought for a title. He's fought the best in the division, and yeah, he's not come up a winner in those fights, or a lot of those fights, but he's definitely got better wins than what O'Day Osbourne has got, and also better wins. He's fought and beaten better opponents than O'Day Osbourne is himself. And again, I don't mean that disrespectful to O'Day Osbourne. It's just, there's levels even at the UFC level, and I just think Steve Erceg's a level above. When you look at how O'Day Osbourne can win this fight, well, of course, there's the flash KO. Or if he drops him and jumps on, a choke or something like that, maybe that's a possibility. But again, I just feel that everything you could think of from an O'Day Osbourne win perspective is just super low percentage. I think Steve Erceg's better in every single area. If there was a knockout, I would say that Steve Erceg's more likely to get the knockout. If there was a submission, I would say it's more likely Erceg. And if there's a clean decision win, then I would say it's more likely Erceg. Even if O'Day Osbourne puts up the fight of his life and makes this super close and competitive, and let's say that, we have a close decision, do I think that O'Day Osbourne's going to beat Steve Erceg in 2 out of 3 rounds? I just think it's very, very slim. Does O'Day Osbourne steal a round? Well, maybe if one round's super close and one judge gives it to him. But overall, again, because Erceg, in my opinion, is better in every area of the fight, I just find it difficult to see where O'Day Osbourne's going to steal a round, unless it's, like I say, he hits him with something hard and just drops him, and then the judges score that knockdown greater than everything else that's happened in that round. So yeah, like I say, from O'Day Osbourne's perspective, I think it's all super low percentage, and I'd be shocked to see Steve Erceg lose this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Steve Erceg to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Iasmin Lucindo versus Angela Hill. Now, this is one of the fights, because we've got Lucindo ranging from around minus 185 to minus 205 in that region, and it's going to be interesting to see where the line moves. And I'm kind of feeling that the line might move wider here, and the reason I say that is because it's one of the fights where the odds are it's probably one of the shorter odds in regards to, there's not a minus 400, minus 500 favourite in the fight. So I think anybody that's betting, singular fights, not parlaying, Lucindo's going to be an option, because she's a playable option due to the betting line, which means if more and more people jump on that, the line widens, and then she suddenly becomes minus 250, minus 280, minus 300, and then suddenly she becomes a parlay piece herself. So yeah, look, that's from the betting perspective. As for how the fight plays out, it is an interesting fight. Angela Hill is always never going to be an easy opponent for any fighter, and again, the same applies here. I don't think Lucindo's going to have everything her way in this fight. Angela Hill's super experienced. She's been around the block. She's fought the best of the best for years and years. Well-rounded as well, predominantly a striker, but the wrestling and grappling's got better over the years as well. The issue that I've got with Hill is she's 40, and again, I don't think she looks like your typical, or at least fights like your typical 40-year-old. She hasn't got that massive age decline on her, but the bottom line is she's 40. She's got a lot of miles on the clock. She's been fighting at the highest level for years and years. And then on the flip side, you've got Lucindo here, who's 23 years old. Legitimately, Angela Hill could be, Lucindo's mother from an age perspective. There's that big difference. There's 17 years between them. It's very close to the age difference between my wife and my daughter. So, Angela Hill is almost double the age of Lucindo, and at some point that is going to play a factor, even before we talk about styles. But I think Lucindo is just going to be a little bit sharper here. I think from a striking perspective, even though that's where Angela Hill's game is, I think Hill will put up some decent numbers. She'll be competitive, but I think Lucindo's going to be landing the cleaner strikes. I think she's probably going to be a little bit faster inside there as well. But Lucindo's also got a decent takedown game as well. Now, when Lucindo struggles, she normally struggles against fighters that have also got a good takedown game themselves and, try and take her down. But when Lucindo's fighting a striker where Lucindo's decent herself, but has also the option of scoring takedowns and getting on top, then that's when she flourishes. And although Angela Hill, like I say, over the years, even though her background is within Muay Thai, she has developed very well from a wrestling and grappling perspective, but I still think Lucindo's going to be able to get takedowns here if she needs them. It just gives her a couple of paths to victory, because if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think that the fight's close, but I think Lucindo's got every chance of winning. However, when you start mixing in the wrestling and grappling, if this fight's won and lost from a wrestling and grappling perspective, then you would definitely lean on the side of Lucindo. So, yeah, I think that you can't rule out an Angela Hill win just because, like I say, she's a super vet. She's been in there against the best of the best, and she will be competitive in the majority of her fights. So you can't rule out a win for Hill. I just think it's going to be difficult here against Lucindo, who I believe is going to be a little bit quicker, a little bit sharper. She's, like I say, 17 years younger as well, so she's got the age on her side. And then she's probably got the extra path to victory. Well, she has got the extra path to victory with the wrestling and grappling. So, additional ways to win the fight. Yeah, I think that, like I say, I'm not going to be shocked if Hill wins, but I do think it's a fight for Lucindo. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Iasmin Lucindo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Andre Fili versus Christian Rodriguez. Now, this is probably one of the underdogs that I think is more live at the entire card, and Andre Fili is the underdog. But again, it might be a little bit of a stretch because Christian Rodriguez has got a good skill set. And Andre Fili, although Fili's been a fighter that I've loved to bet on throughout the years, I bet him plenty of times as an underdog and cashed. I've bet him as a favourite and cashed. I've also lost bets on him as well. It's not all been plain sailing, but Fili's a fighter that I've definitely liked throughout the years. I love his style. He's very well-rounded, good striker, wrestler, grappler, underrated wrestling and grappling as well. But against Christian Rodriguez, I kind of feel like he's potentially fighting just a younger version of himself and a more fresh version of himself, because Christian Rodriguez is very much similar in regards to style as Andre Fili. He's a good striker, predominant striker, but then he's got this really underrated wrestling and grappling game as well. Now, it does also, it is also worth mentioning that my picks on Christian Rodriguez fights have never been totally clean either. I occasionally get his prediction and his fights and the predictions wrong. Like, there's something about Rodriguez. He tends to be one of those fighters where when I think he's going to win, he loses, and then when I think he's going to lose, he wins. But, his style itself and how he fights isn't that difficult to analyse. I think I've probably just been super unlucky in a lot of the fights that I predicted of Christian Rodriguez. But like I say, style versus style, they're both very similar. It's just like Rodriguez it seems to be a younger, fresher version of an Andre Fili. The thing that Fili's got on his side here, though, he's got experience. He's dealt with fighters like Christian Rodriguez before. He's fought, in my opinion, better fighters than Rodriguez throughout his UFC career as well. He's also taller, going to be longer, rangier. But again, in the UFC Apex cage, it's a small cage. I think that kind of favours Rodriguez as well. It's just on a card where, like I say, there's a lack of potential live underdogs. I do think Fili is one of the more liver underdogs, if that makes sense. But I'm still leaning towards picking Christian Rodriguez to win the fight. I think the line probably should be a little bit shorter, but outside of that, I just feel that I'm seeing those slow decline moments of Andre Fili where he's just not firing as much as what he used to. He's He's not grasping fights like he used to. Like the Cub Swanson fight was much closer than what I thought it should have been. And then you look at the fight against Melchizedek Costa. I bet Fili as an underdog there. I thought Fili was going to do really well. And Costa absolutely battered him in that fight. Fili didn't look like he had an answer for anything that Costa gave him. And Costa actually finished him in the first round as well by submission, which again is something you wouldn't normally see from Fili, especially with it being a guillotine. And, Fili coming from Team Alpha Male, you should have every type of escape from a guillotine. They're a gym known for really good guillotines throughout, the fighters that have been fighting with them for years. And then Christian Rodriguez fights Costa and he loses as well. But, that's a closer decision. Some argued that Rodriguez should have got the nod, but it was a close fight. Whereas, again, we are getting into MMA math, which you shouldn't really put too much stock into. But the bottom line is I'm just seeing slight decline moments from Fili, whereas Christian Rodriguez is still young, fresh, and live in the division and on his way up. So I kind of feel like you have got a fighter that one side is on the way up, the other side's on the way down, and the meeting has the passing, if that makes sense. So like I say, from a betting perspective, the odds are a little bit too wide. I think Fili is a live underdog, but I'm picking Christian Rodriguez to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Miles Johns versus Gene Matsumoto. Now, this is another one of those fights where I think that the underdog's liver than the betting line suggests. And I'm actually quite surprised by the betting line. Like, Matsumoto's opened up at like -300, -350. I definitely didn't expect that. So when you're looking at if you're betting this fight, where the value is, well, I definitely don't think there's any value in the favourite here. I think all the values with the underdog. It's just, do I think the underdog's going to win? I think it's a tough fight for the underdog in Miles Johns. But like I say, I was kind of expecting Matsumoto to be around the -175, -200 favourite. I can understand why Matsumoto is the favourite. I'm not disputing that. It's just -300, -350 is a very, very wide line for this fight. Like, Miles Johns is a good fighter. He's got good qualities. Decent boxing, good wrestling. He's got the ability to go 3 rounds without tiring. My only real fault on Johns, and this is where he might get unstuck in this fight a little bit, is the volume. The volume can be quite low, a little bit actionless at times. But when you look at, again, the apex, the cage, like, Miles Johns will be more suited into a smaller cage than a bigger cage where there's more room to work, because he'll probably be a little less active in a bigger cage. But Matsumoto's a good fighter. Like, his Muay Thai's good, his wrestling's good, his grappling's good. I actually think style versus style, they're both very well-rounded and they both match up well. It's just, I think Gene Matsumoto is probably just a little bit better in every single area, but it's not like a million times better, which is why I kind of feel like the line is a little bit too wide. Like, yeah, I think Matsumoto's a slightly better striker. Yes, I think he might be the slightly better wrestling, although Johns does have good wrestling. And then from a grappling perspective, I think Matsumoto will be better on top of Johns than Johns on top of Matsumoto. So like I say, I just feel that Matsumoto does slightly edge Johns in every area, but it's only a very slight edge. And then when you're looking at, like I say, live underdogs and big betting lines, I definitely think that the value is on Miles Johns. I do think the line is too wide, but when it comes to a straight pick and prediction, I am picking Gene Matsumoto to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Eryk Anders versus Christian Leroy Duncan. Christian Leroy Duncan, -600 favourite, wider in some spots, a little bit shorter in others, but ultimately a very big favourite in this fight. And again, you can kind of understand it. Eryk Anders is a fighter that's got a lot of miles on the clock, that's been around for a while. He's aging a little bit as well, whereas Christian Leroy Duncan, I think that, look, he's got to mind his P's and Q's, because Eryk Anders can still crack. Like, power is the last thing that goes in aging fighters. Everybody knows that. The speed and the movement and the flair and the elusivity are the first things that go with a declining aged fighter. But the power is the last thing that goes. Eryk Anders is still big. He can still crack. So, Duncan's got to mind his P's and Q's for sure. But I genuinely think that's probably the be all and the end all for Eryk Anders, just finding that flash KO. Outside of that, I think that Duncan's going to be the better striker, the quicker mover, more elusive, more awkward, unorthodox. I think even when it comes to a wrestling and grappling perspective, I think that Duncan could potentially be effective here as well. Physicality, I think, is going to be stronger, bigger inside the cage as well. I just feel that it's actually a nightmare matchup for Anders. The one other thing that I do feel like might favour Anders a little bit more in this fight is the fact that it's at the apex, and again the cage is smaller, because the last thing that Eryk Anders will want is this young, hungry, elusive, fast, awkward striker being in a massive cage and running rings around him. So the fact it's a smaller cage, Anders will be able to cover distance a little bit better. Duncan won't have all the movement that he would prefer. So the one thing that I would maybe say here is, and it's probably the most difficult thing to ever predict, and I know I have predicted Duncan to have this advantage, but if I'm wrong and Eryk Anders has the strength advantage in this fight, then that could be interesting, because if Anders can close the distance, clinch up with Duncan, push Duncan's back up against the cage, and basically do a cage stalling job on Duncan, you know, punch, 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 few knees, just keep the referee away from splitting them up and just making this a dirty, ugly, gritty fight, maybe that's a route for Anders, but ultimately I'm just not seeing it. I think Duncan's also got every chance of being the stronger fighter, and if he is, then outside of that flash KO, I just don't see a legitimate path to victory for Eryk Anders. I just think Duncan's the better fighter, more elusive, more awkward, more difficult to beat. And again, that can be a big problem for certain fighters from an opponent perspective. If the opponent's just difficult to beat, then you're going to have a hard time beating them before you even get your own game going. So, yeah, I think it's a good fight for Duncan. I understand why the betting line's large as well. If Duncan was like minus 200 here, every man and the dog would be on him. So, yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Christian Leroy Duncan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Julius Walker versus Raffael Cerqueira. Now, Julius Walker had a very good showing in his UFC debut against Alonzo Menefield. Didn't quite get the job done, but, you know, was also knackered, cardio, gas tank empty. But he showed heart, he showed toughness. He got hit numerous times by a Menefield that's an absolute unit. And he also went toe-to-toe with an Alonzo Menefield as well, that is a UFC vet that's been in there against some really good guys. And Walker's young and he's improving, and he's got this second fight now in the UFC and against a very different opponent to an Alonzo Menefield. We do have to also mention that Julius Walker is also around a minus 600 favourite. And again, depending on where you look, you can see minus 700, you can also see minus 500, but he's a very big favourite, and a very big favourite for a reason. I actually think he could probably be wider as well. Like, Cerqueira is a fighter that I'm not convinced on. We didn't really know too much about Cerqueira when he came to the UFC. He had limited tape. I also questioned whether, because he fought a lot of his fights outside the UFC for one promotion in Brazil, and those promotions, or that promotion, don't seem to have all the fights available. So I'm just wondering whether he had a connection with that promotion and asked them to remove his fights publicly so nobody can tape him, study him, know what to expect, all that sort of stuff. Bit of a conspiracy theory. Would be smart if Cerqueira actually did that. But now he's had 2 fights in the UFC. He got knocked out brutally in round 1 by Ivo Aslan. Then he got knocked out by Modestas Bukauskas also in round 1. And it just seems that Cerqueira's got a level of offense, but once you break that offense and you get him on the back foot and you start landing on him, the dude just crumbles. And that's just not UFC quality or caliber. And I genuinely think that he's going to go 0-3 in the UFC, and I'd be surprised to see him again, because what Julia Walker showed against Menefield is, even when he's fighting an opponent that is big, that is powerful, that is strong, and has got a level of attack, he can take that level of attack and still push his opponents backwards. And I see this happening against Cerqueira. I think Cerqueira's going to think it's the last hurrah, it's his final chance. He's going to come forward super aggressive. I think Walker's going to eat it. Walker's going to fire back. Cerqueira's going to get on the back foot. So Walker's going to push his back to the cage, which again, small cage, won't take too many steps as a light heavyweight to get moving backwards. And you're back against the cage wall. And then Walker is just going to unload on, knees, elbows, close punches. Cerqueira's going to turtle up, and either the referee will stop it or Cerqueira will drop and the referee will stop it. So I just don't think, after seeing what Walker went through against Menefield and still looked decent throughout, that he's going to have more of a problem against Cerqueira. I think he's going to be able to use that fight against Menafield, do exactly what he did against Menafield against Cerqueira, except have more success and have his opponent crumble in front of him, whereas Menafield didn't. You know, he was stoic and stayed in there throughout. But from what I've seen of Cerqueira, once he's on the back foot and he's getting hit, he's getting landed on, he does struggle, shells up a little bit, and, you know, at any weight in the UFC, that's usually the beginning of the end. But as a light heavyweight, yeah, you're asking for trouble. So for those reasons, I'm picking Julius Walker to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Elijah Smith versus Toshiomi Kazama. Now, Elijah Smith, do I think he should be minus 600? No, I think it's wide, but it's minus 600 for a reason. You know, do you really want to back Kazama as a big underdog? Well, I just think you're going to lose money if you do. So it's one of them where I feel that the favourite's too wide of a favourite, but you're not really going to be queuing up at the betting window for the underdog either, because essentially I do believe you're just going to lose your money. I don't see... I mean, if you're hell-bent in betting this fight on the money line, then yeah, you probably... If it's a single fight, yeah, you're probably going to bet Kazama, but if you're hell-bent on betting this fight, I would probably put Smith in a parlay. But again, I think the line's wide. I don't see too much value in a parlay unless it's one of these fun parlays that's got like 10 fights on it and Smith's one of them, then I kind of get that. But yeah, it's a difficult one. It's not too enticing from a betting perspective. Kazama's got a little bit of something about him, like he can be fun, and he won by triangle in his last fight. You don't see too many triangle submissions nowadays, but in the UFC nowadays. But like Elijah Smith, although I still think his skill set is a little bit raw, a little bit green, the dude's going to be improving from fight to fight. You can tell he's super athletic, you can tell he's got power, he's well-rounded as well, so at a certain level in the UFC is going to be a problem opponent. Once you start stepping up levels from Kazama, then that's where I think Smith will have issues. But for this level, I think Smith's going to be fine here. Like I say, I think his striking's going to be better, wrestling's going to be better, grappling's going to be better. I think he can probably win in a variety of different ways, whereas Kazama, probably his best route is to try and get Smith on his back. But again, I think the wrestling of Smith's better, which also includes defensive wrestling. So do I think Kazama's going to be able to put Smith on his back a lot? No. Does Smith put Kazama on Kazama's back and Kazama hits another triangle? Well, possible, but you know, it's a low percentage outcome. Submitting any fighter in the UFC at a UFC level off your back is very, very difficult. To do it twice in a row, unless you're a super high level BJJ black belt, and I mean like a serious high level BJJ black belt, it's going to be unlikely. So yeah, I just think Kazama's got a problem fight here. I'm just struggling to see where he's going to get his offense going to a point where he starts to have A, success, and B, a lot of success, enough success to steal rounds. And because of that, I think Smith's just going to be dominant here, striking better, wrestling better, grappling better, cardio, athleticism, strength, physical attributes. I think he's all on the side of Elijah Smith. So for those reasons, I'm picking Elijah Smith to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Joselyne Edwards versus Priscila Cachoeira. So Priscila Cachoeira's always got a surprise in her. You know, she's stoic, she hits hard, she's exciting, she'll come forward, she'll leave it all in the cage. She's never one to have one of these fights where she'll walk out thinking, I didn't try absolutely everything in my power to win that fight. So she's definitely one of the more entertaining fights, and like I say, she's had a couple of nice knockouts on her record in the UFC as well. But Joselyne Edwards is a fighter that, again, you might have had value on her a few days ago if you were looking at the minus 220, minus 250 lines. But, you know, money's coming on her. She's minus 300 now. Kind of expected that. She's a fighter that I said the last time that she fought that I've been really surprised with the development. She came into the UFC and she looked like she was going to be one of these passive fighters that might have a fight or two in the UFC, but then might lose a couple, might get cut, and then we never kind of hear from her again. But Joselyne Edwards, although she's exchanged some wins and losses, and she's been on some bad decision wins, and she's been on some bad decision losses as well, you know, she's had it both ways. But Edwards is a fighter that's drastically improved her striking, that's drastically improved her wrestling, that's drastically improved her grappling. You know, she's had a gi on and she's competed in grappling tournaments to help that as well. And she kind of came into the UFC as a striker anyway. So she's a fighter that's now actually super well-rounded and quite difficult to beat. And I've been very surprised with her. The last time I had any money on one of her fights, I was actually betting against her. and it was against Ailin Perez, I believe, and I thought Ailin Perez was going to run through her, wrestle, grapple, very, Perez is a very heavy topside grappler, but Joselyne Edwards was like sweeping, reversing. She made that fight super close. I won the bet. I think I had like 4 or 4.5 units on Perez at like minus 200 or something like that. So I thought it was going to be a simple win for Perez, but man, Joselyne Edwards made me sweat. Man, she made that fight way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And since then, I've just been super impressed with her, and she's gone from strength to strength. Now, like I say, she does have to be careful here because Cachoeira does have a surprise or two in her. She has been in fights where she's been an underdog and won, and been a big underdog and won, and nobody's expecting her to win, and then she does win. But again, when you're looking at skill for skill, discipline versus discipline, I think that Edwards is the better striker technically. Cachoeira's probably got more power, but I think from a technical striking perspective, especially when it comes to technique and variety of strikes, I think Edwards is the better striker. And then when you look at the wrestling, I don't think the wrestling's like super high level on either side, or at least super high level for the UFC on either side, but I suspect that Edwards is going to have the body lock trip takedowns and be able to get on top of Cachoeira if she wants to. And then when you look at the grappling, I think Edwards has got a massive advantage in the grappling now as well. So this is what I mean. Edwards has come in as a predominant striker, at least that's what she looked like, and has now got real good grappling chops as well. So yeah, look, if it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Edwards does the better work. Although, like I say, be very careful because Edwards has been on some crazy decisions, both either way, winning and losing. But when it comes to getting the takedowns, top control time, trips, getting on top, I think that Edwards could have a lot of top control time here as well, whereas Cachoeira might be out of her depth with being on her back and Edwards being on top of her. So yeah, look, I completely agree with the betting line. I actually think it's going to keep growing as well. I think Edwards will probably go in there again at like minus 400, minus 450. And I do think that this is a good fight for Edwards to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Joselyne Edwards to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Uros Medic versus Gilbert Urbina. And again, it's another fight where we've got another big favourite, Uros Medic being that favourite. And again, I kind of get it. Gilbert Urbina has got some qualities, definitely, he's well-rounded. But I just don't know where he's going to beat Medic in this fight, again, without, a one-punch flash KO. And then when you look at this fight from a striking perspective, I think when they are going at it and they are exchanging, I think it's going to be Medic that's the better striker, the more dangerous striker, and the more likely to land that KO anyway. So I think Urbina's probably going to try and wrestle Medic. That seems to be where Medic is probably going to be more susceptible in this fight, but again, you can never rule out a fighter getting taken down. You can never say never, because if an entry is good enough, then a fighter can get taken down. But I just don't think the fight over the course of the fight is going to be won and lost within the wrestling and grappling. I think that it's more likely to be won and lost in the striking. I think the better work and the more action is going to be on the feet striking. And like I say, maybe Urbina gets a couple of takedowns here and there, but do I really see a 3-round fight that's being decided on, the factor of there's been a lot of takedowns and a lot of top control time? I just don't. I think it is predominantly going to be a striking affair, and because of that, I can't really look past the favourite here in Medic. I think Medic he's got deceptive power. I think he's going to be a little bit better than Urbina from the technique perspective as well. And I just feel like he's been in there and fought and beaten better level of opponents than Urbina as well. So yeah, like I say, Urbina, I think his best chance is probably knocking Medic out, but the game plan for me would probably be to shoot the takedowns, because he's going to be susceptible to getting knocked out himself, and I just don't think the takedown game plan is going to be the one that flourishes. I think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet, and I think Medic is going to be a little bit sharper, more powerful, more dangerous. For those reasons, I'm picking Uros Medic to win this fight. And finally, the final fight to break down. Shock, we've got another big favourite, minus 450 again. We've got Gabriella Fernandes versus Julius Stoliarenko. It's Gabriella Fernandes that's the favourite here. From a striking perspective, I think she's going to be by far the better striker here. From a grappling perspective, it's going to be interesting. She's going to definitely have to stay away from Stoliarenko's guard, at least for the early moments of this fight. Pretty much, I think 10 out of the 11 wins for Stoliarenko have come by submission, and pretty much out of all of those 10 submission wins, the majority, like 90% of them, are round one arm bars. So Stoliarenko is, or at least definitely seems, and I hate saying this, but the stats don't lie, she's definitely a round one armbar or bust fighter, which in the UFC, it's amazing that a fighter's managed to have some sort of longevity in the UFC, because like I said earlier on when I spoke about Toshiomi Kazama, actually hitting submissions off your back, like triangles, like arm bars, omoplatas, kimuras, the submissions that generally start off your back, very, very difficult to hit at this level in the UFC, because fighters are just so well trained nowadays, so well trained defensively from a jiu-jitsu perspective. But like I say, Stoliarenko, the stats tell you that if she doesn't hit that armbar in round one, that she doesn't win many fights. So it's definitely something that's interesting as well, because Fernandes is predominantly a striker. So what Stoliarenko is probably going to have to try and do is either take Gabriella Fernandes down, and Stoliarenko's wrestling isn't the strongest at this level in the UFC either, or pull guard on Fernandes, because the one thing Fernandes isn't going to do as a predominant striker is shoot on a fighter that's pretty much the path to victory is a round one armbar. So I don't think Fernandes is going to be shooting a takedown, so I could genuinely see Stoliarenko having the type of game plan of let's just clinch up with her and let's just pull guard on her and try and hit that armbar in round one. And look, crazier things have happened, and Stoliarenko's done that in the UFC prior anyway. But again, when you're looking at percentage outcomes and how likely and the probability, I just feel like it's super, super low. I'll never ever pick the fighter whose main path to victory and most competitive path to victory is going to be a round one armbar submission win in the UFC. It's just not something I'll ever get on board with, because there's so many things that can play out differently and go wrong and not lead to that path to victory. So yeah, look, from a striking perspective, I think Fernandes will light Stoliarenko up on the feet as well, and if she's lighting her up and pushing her backwards, then the pulling guard might be her only option. Well, unless Fernandes actually goes into a guard, even at all, I'm saying round one, but for as long as this fight goes on, if Fernandes just stays out of Stoliarenko's guard, I think she lights her up on the feet and does some really good work. Like I say, I'm never ever going to side with the fighter that's main win condition is a round one armbar. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gabriella Fernandes to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Thank you all once again, and as always, for tuning in. I always really appreciate it, whether that's on one of our podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. If you also want to jump into the YouTube channel, we've got youtube.com/MMA Play 365. If you do so, please hit the subscribe button. It really does help us. It helps the reach as well. And also drop a comment. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who we disagree on. As you can tell, I've picked every single favourite for this card. So if you're going to be one of these people that comes on and say, oh, how can you do a prediction podcast that picks every single favourite? Well, all I'll say to that is go back, do your research, and find me that card where the last time is that I picked every single favourite. It's an unusual card, a very strange card. There's a lot of chalked favourites, and the chalked favourites for a reason. So yeah, look, again, the point I'm leading to is tell me if you think that I'm an idiot for picking all favourites on this card, because what it does do in the comment section is it does help the algorithm and does help the YouTube channel. So everybody that does comment, they are contributing to that, and I do appreciate it. Even if you're somebody that comes in with some ridiculous comments, I still appreciate you as well. But yeah, like I say, drop a comment. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who we disagree on. Tell me who you think is the live underdog in this card, or the live underdogs, because I genuinely don't believe there's that many. So yeah, come on to YouTube. Let's have a conversation. It is always me that replies to the comments. I do try and get back to every single comment as well throughout the week. So yeah, come on to YouTube, subscribe, drop a comment. And for one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, which, like I've already mentioned a few times, probably likely that you're going to do that on such a difficult betting card, because it's my job to find out where the value is. It might be for the first time in many years that I look at props, fight goes the distance, fight doesn't go the distance, totals, overs, unders, fighter to win by knockout or submission. Definitely going to be scowling for the prop markets on this card. with the money lines being so chalked up and so high. So if you do want to jump into the action, make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. From a professional handicapper perspective, we've got something for every type of gambler, like I've said in the introduction. And again, we've got Bayes AI as well, which I'm super interested to see the stats on Bayes AI and who Bayes AI is favouring to win, because there's always plenty of underdogs in there. And on a card where I'm personally not seeing any underdogs or many underdogs, it's going to be interesting to see what Bayes is producing. So you're going to have Bayes AI in every subscription package as well to help you and your betting process and the tools that you use. And again, everything's super affordable, $5 for one event, $10 a month, or it's $99 for an entire year, which has got super value on that annual package as well. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome, thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next week.